Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're taking a look at the new Ryzen 9 7950X 3D, the first of the 3D V-Cache enabled Zen 4 parts. Well, I suppose that's not entirely true because there's also meant to be the 7900X 3D, but AMD hasn't provided a sample for that part. Probably because I don't think it's going to make a whole lot of sense. There'll be just 6 cores with the 3D V-Cache. So I think either this part or the upcoming 7800X 3D would be the better buys.
Today's video is sponsored by LG and their brand new 27-inch Ultra Gear OLED gaming monitor, the 27GR95QE. This display is the perfect choice for high refresh rate HDR gaming. It has a blazing fast 240Hz refresh, which combined with elite response times gives you super clear motion, among the best we've ever tested. Plus you get a stunning HDR experience thanks to OLED's per pixel local dimming and deep zero blacks, giving you that punchy, vibrant, dazzling image quality we expect from a true HDR product, which this is. I recommend this monitor. It performed well in our review over on Monitors Unboxed, so to learn more and upgrade yourself to an Ultra Gear OLED, check the links in the description below.
Now, there's also the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, which, like the 7700X, is an 8-core, 16-thread processor, and truth be told, it's the Zen 4 3D V-Cache part that we're most excited for. So, in typical AMD fashion, they've delayed the release of their most interesting part for another 5 weeks. And why, you might ask? Don't know, and there's really no technical reason for it, so it would seem as though AMD is doing this simply to push buyers towards spending more on the 7950X 3D or 7900X 3D. Now look, the 7950X 3D is arguably the better deal at $700 as it costs $44 per core, whereas the 7800X 3D at $450, that's set to cost $56 per core, an almost 30% increase. But then only half of the 7950X 3D cores actually feature 3D V-Cache technology, so the comparison isn't exactly that straightforward. So, in total, the 7950X 3D packs 128 megabytes of L3 cache, but as this is a dual CCD product, not all of the cores can access all of the L3. The cores in the primary CCD, for example, get the standard 32 megabytes, plus the stacked 64 megabytes of 3D V-Cache for a total of 96 megabytes, whereas the cores in the second CCD only get the standard 32 megabytes. This means gaming performance has the potential to be significantly improved when the processing is handled by the primary CCD, essentially making the 7950X 3D an 8-core processor. The problem, or rather challenge, is that it's imperative that the 3D V-Cache enabled cores handle gaming tasks, with the second CCD being treated more as if they were E-cores of an Intel processor. And AMD's dual CCD CPUs are really quite tricky when it comes to gaming, and we often see a performance decline due to the larger latency penalty seen when communicating across the Infinity Fabric. This makes the 59X 3D more of a hybrid gaming CPU in my opinion. It's unlikely to be AMD's best gaming CPU, nor will it be their best productivity CPU. The best gaming CPU is almost certainly going to be the 7800X 3D, while the best productivity CPU will be the standard 7950X, as it's able to clock higher. Now, the 7800X 3D, that won't suffer the same latency penalty when communicating amongst cores, and you don't have to worry about how the operating system or game utilizes or sees the CPU. Meanwhile, the 7950X will be faster for productivity work, again, just for the simple fact that the cores can clock higher. So the 7950X 3D is really for those who want to work and play, and are looking for sort of the best possible performance for both tasks out of a single chip. Now, to ensure that the processor works correctly, AMD recommends using the latest version of either Windows 10 or Windows 11, a 3D V-Cache specific BIOS for your AM5 motherboard, so a BIOS update will be required for optimal performance, game mode must be enabled, the Xbox Game Bar app needs to be up to date, and the latest chipset driver must be installed. Out of interest, I decided to test the 7950X 3D on my existing AM5 test system with no updates, and I can confirm performance was poor, basically slower than the 7950X in all of the games I tested, so you absolutely need the correct BIOS and chipset driver at a minimum. Now, all of the testing was conducted on our new AM5 test system built inside the Corsa 4000D airflow case using the iCUE H150i Elite LCD XT liquid cooler, RM1200X shift power supply, and 4TB MP600 Pro XT SSD. So a big thank you to Corsair for helping out with that hardware. The 4000D airflow is a fantastic case, ventilation is excellent, as is the cable management, and with the IQ H150i Elite LCD XT rad shoved in the front, the 7950X3D ran really well. I've got to say, as good as the Elite LCD XT looks though, my favourite bit of kit here is the new RM1200X shift power supply. Why we haven't seen a design like this until now is a bit beyond me. It's so much easier to work with and just much easier to get a really nice, neat finish. Great cable management, I genuinely love this power supply. Also worth noting is the new MSI Mag X670E Tomahawk motherboard, which MSI sent over just in time for the 7950X 3D release. Now, although we did install this board in the 4000D Airflow case for some testing and featured it in the B-roll, we still stuck with the Aorus Master for our benchmarks, as that's what we've used for all the other CPUs, and AMD also provided a BIOS for the 7950X 3D on the Aorus Master. Still, it is good to see MSI releasing another X670 board, and the Tomahawk marks their 5th release. MSI is pricing the Tomahawk at $330 US to compete with the Asus TUF X670E Plus Wi-Fi, which makes sense as they are quite similarly equipped, though the Tomahawk does pack what should be a more robust 14 power stage V-core using 80 amp rated components. Now for the testing, I normally include a lot more application benchmarks than what you're about to see, and the reason why I've cut down this section of the review is because when it comes to productivity, the 7950X 3D is basically just a slightly slower version of the 7950X, as the primary CCD can't clock quite as high due to the 3D V-cache. So the focus is going to be on gaming performance, as this is where the X3D part should shine. As for the rest of the test notes, all of the test systems have been configured with a GeForce RTX 4090, Windows 11, and resizeable bar has been enabled. Okay, let's get into the data. First, here's a look at the operating behavior of the 7950X 3D during the Cinebench R23 all-core workload. The 3D V-cache enabled CCD1 typically clocks between 4750 and 4800 MHz, whereas CCD2, with the standard 32 MB of L3 cache, that clocked its cores at 4900 MHz. The standard 7950X, for example, clocks the CCD1 cores at 5.1 GHz, and its CCD2 at 4.9 GHz, so around a 4% clock speed advantage for the original model. Also worth noting is that along with the lower TDP when compared to the standard 7950X, 120 watts versus 170 watts, the 3D V-cache part also sees the TJ max lowered from 95 degrees to 85 degrees. So I guess that's good news for those of you who didn't believe that 95 degrees was a safe operating temperature for Zen 4, or that it was done by design. Hopefully 85 degrees is more acceptable there, because this will be the operating temperature with pretty much any AIO or air cooler. And the results you're seeing here are with the Corsa IQ H150i Elite LCD XT installed. Now, with just CCD1 enabled, so the 3D V-cache enabled CCD, the clocks were slightly higher at 4830 MHz, so around a percent increase compared to what we saw with both CCDs enabled. Then, if we disable CCD1 and just have the second CCD enabled, the cores clocked at 5220 MHz, so that's a 7% boost when compared to what we saw with both CCDs enabled. So if you could remove the thermal and power limits of the 7950X 3D, you would see a bit of a performance uplift, but due to time, this isn't something that we've been able to explore for this review. And this right here is why I'm not going to waste your time with a load of productivity benchmarks. If you want to know how the 7950X 3D performs for compression, decompression, video production, and code compilation work, please just watch our 7950X video and deduct about 5% from the result. And this is exactly what we're seeing in Cinebench R23, where the 3D V-cache model is 5% slower than the original, making it 12% slower than the 13900KS, though power usage of the Core i9 to achieve this result is pretty insane, and we'll look at that in a moment. Single core performance should be much the same, especially if the application is instructed to prioritize the second CCD without the 3D V-cache, as those cores do clock higher. Here, the 7950X 3D was just 1.5% slower than the 7950X, though that did make it substantially slower than the 12900KS, as it was 13% slower. So for lightly threaded applications such as Adobe Photoshop 2022, the 7950X 3D can be quite a bit slower than the 13900KS. Here, for example, it is 11% slower, and then 3% slower than the standard 7950X. Now, while those E-cores of the 13900K are great for accelerating Cinebench scores, they're not always that efficient. And here we find that to be the case in Blender, where the 7950X 3D is 8% faster than the 13900KS, and again, just 3% slower than the standard 7950X. The issue with the 13900K when it comes to productivity is power consumption, and while you can enforce power limits, that will reduce performance, extending the 7950X's lead further. So whereas the 13900K/KS pushed total system consumption to just shy of 500 watts, the 7950X 3D ran comfortably under 300 watts, using less power than even the 13600K, which is super impressive. Also, despite the addition of the 64MB 3D V-cache, total system usage was reduced by 30% when compared to the standard 7950X, and again, that is due to the 120W TDP versus the 170W TDP of the original. Okay, so time for the gaming benchmarks, and we'll start with Factorio, which was an impressive showing for the 5800X 3D, and is still to this day. The 7950X 3D, on the other hand, not so much, as the 3D V-cache enabled chip was really no faster than the standard 7950X. It appears as though this workload is running on the wrong CCD, and is therefore not taking advantage of the 3D V-cache, and to prove this theory, I just went ahead and disabled the second CCD in the BIOS and reran the test, labeling the result as 7800X 3D simulated, because I think that's essentially what this configuration is. And this does look a lot better. With the second CCD disabled, we're seeing an almost 80% increase in performance for the 7950X 3D, aka 7800X 3D. With a score of 433 points, the upcoming 7800X 3D should be around 25% faster than the 5800X 3D and 60% faster than the 13900K, giving AMD an easy win in simulation games such as Factorio. Now, for testing CPU performance in Hogwarts, we're testing in the Hogsmeade section of the game. Here, the 7950X 3D produced the best result yet with an average frame rate of 84 FPS, though this made it just 5% faster than the 13900KS using 7200 memory, but it was also a 14% uplift over the standard 7950X. Then with the second CC disabled, performance did decline in this example, suggesting that the 7800X 3D will be comparable to the 13900K in this title. Now, Spider-Man Remastered appears to hit a performance wall around 140 FPS. The 7950X 3D was good for 136 FPS, which allowed it to match the 13900K/KS with the Intel CPUs using DDR5 6400 memory. This also meant the 7950X 3D was 10% faster than the 7950X, so not a massive uplift there, but a nice performance boost all the same. However, if we disable the second CCD for a 7800X 3D simulated result, the average frame rate improved by 3%, but the 1% lows by a much more substantial 7%. And this means the 7800X 3D could be up to 20% faster than the 7700X in this game. Now, ACC was a big hit for the 5800X 3D, blowing away all other CPUs that were available at the time. However, Intel has largely caught up with their 13th gen series, and now the 5800X 3D is just 3% faster than the 13900KS using DDR5 7200. The 7950X 3D, on the other hand, is faster than the 5800X 3D, but only by a mere 1.5%, and disabling the second CCD didn't boost performance here. So disappointingly, these new Zen 4 3D V-cache parts really aren't that much faster, at least in this example. Next up, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and here the 7950X 3D was 5% faster than the 13900KS using DDR5 7200, so a good result there for AMD. The 3D V-cache is also providing around a 20% boost over the standard 7950X. Now, disabling the second CCD did boost performance in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, increasing the average frame rate by a further 5%. However, it was the massive 18% increase in 1% lows that stood out the most here. The original Zen 4 parts already offered strong 1% lows in this title, and with that second CC disabled, that pattern continues. Now, Rainbow Six Extraction, like Factorio, just sucks with the 7950X 3D, and in fact performance here is broken. I did notify AMD of this, but they didn't get back to me with a solution in time for this review, so the results remain as they are. And when I say sucks, I mean at least when compared to the 7950X. The end result is still highly playable performance and very satisfactory 1% lows of 287 FPS, but the average frame rate was still 16% lower than that of the standard 7950X, so we are going a bit backwards here. And this is an odd result that doesn't really make sense, and I expect AMD will be able to address this issue. And we find when disabling the second CCD that does in fact address the issue, as the now simulated 7800X 3D result is the best of any CPU tested, beating the 7700X by a 1.5% margin, though 1% lows were improved by 6%. Moving on to Watch Dogs Legion, and here the 7950X 3D really impressed with 214 FPS, making it 14% faster than the 13900KS running DDR5 7200, and a massive 32% faster than the standard 7950X. Also, in this title, disabling the second CCD resulted in no real performance gain, so this is a great showing for the 7950X 3D. I have to say the Hitman 3 performance is fairly underwhelming. Here the 7950X was just a few frames faster than the standard model, and we're seeing a similar thing when comparing the simulated 7800X 3D to the 7700X. So the 3D V-cache appears worthless in this title, or at least it was in the section of the game we use for testing. And this meant the 13900KS using 7200 memory was 5% faster than the 7950X. Next we have the Horizon Zero Dawn results, and here Zen 4 already performed really well, and as we've recently discovered, this isn't a memory sensitive game, and it's probably one of the least memory sensitive games you're likely to come across. Looking at the 7950X 3D, you'd think V-cache doesn't help much here, as we're seeing just a 6% boost over the 7950X when looking at the average frame rate. However, disabling the second CCD did boost performance by a further 7%, making the simulated 7800X 3D configuration 10% faster than the 7700X and 28% faster than the 13900KS using DDR5 7200. Now for Cyberpunk 2077, we've updated the testing to use the Ray Tracing Ultra preset, as this can increase CPU load. The margins though really aren't that different to what we saw with the previous test method using the medium preset. Here the 7950X 3D was just 4% faster than the 7950X, allowing it to match the 13900KS using DDR5 7200. The Riftbreaker appears to be topping out at around 225 to 230 FPS, but even so, the 7950X 3D saw an 18% increase in average frame rate compared to the standard 7950X, so the 3D V-cache is offering a nice performance gain here. This also allowed the 7950X 3D to match the Core i9 processors, and moreover, disabling the second CCD didn't help improve performance, so the 7950X 3D and 7800X 3D should deliver very similar results in this title. Sadly, performance in Counter-Strike Global Offensive does go backwards with the 3D V-cache parts, as core frequency is the performance limitation here, not cache capacity, and this will be true for most older games. We are still seeing 1% lows of over 300 FPS, so I wouldn't say performance is an issue here, but it is still lower than the standard 7950X. Last up, we have a Plague Tale Requiem, and here we're seeing a massive 25% performance boost with the 7950X 3D over the standard model. This was enough to see AMD overtake Intel's 13900KS, albeit by just a 6% margin. Now, disabling the second CCD did again improve performance, though this time by just a 3% margin. Finally, here's a look at our 12-game average, and as you can see, the 7950X 3D and 13900K/KS are very similar overall with no real difference in performance. The 7800X 3D should be slightly faster again, but overall there's really not much in it. So, the 13900K and these new 3D V-cache CPUs are pretty well neck and neck. AMD certainly hasn't blown Intel out of the water here, but when looking at out-of-the-box performance, they do have a very, very slight edge. And it's also worth noting that the 7950X 3D was on average 9% faster than the standard 7950X, while the 7800X 3D looks like it'll be around 10% faster than the 7700X. So some decent performance uplifts there, but not massive overall. So there you have it, the Ryzen 9 7950X 3D. It's an impressive CPU that does a good job of combining strong productivity performance with class-leading gaming performance. So if you're after a CPU that can do it all, the 7950X 3D is going to be an attractive option. But as we saw with the simulated 7800X 3D results, if you're just gaming, I feel like the cheaper 8-core part is going to deliver a much more consistent gaming experience, or at least much more consistent performance. And really, even when the 7950X 3D performs as intended, the 700X 3D will still generally be the faster processor. As for which is the better gaming CPU, the 7950X 3D or the 13900K/KS, well, it really does depend on the game, but overall, I think in my opinion, it's quite clear that they are very similar. I'm not going to bother with a cost per frame comparison here. We're really only interested in these two processors, and value probably takes a backseat to performance when talking about the absolute best choice for gaming. These are kind of your no compromise type gaming solutions, the kind of description that we used to apply to parts like the 8700K and 9900K. Still, the 7950X3D is set to cost around 20% more than the 13900K, which can currently be had for $580 US. A decent Z790 motherboard, they look to start at around $230, while AMD's X670 boards, they're more like $280 there, so quite a premium for the motherboard. The DDR5 memory used for testing the 7950X3D, so G-Skill's DDR5 6000CL30 stuff, that's about $175, while the 6400 kit used for testing the 13900K, that's about the same price, about $5 more, so a negligible difference. And that means you're looking at spending around $1,200 US for the 7950X3D combo, and then about $1,000 for the 13900K combo, making AMD around 20% more expensive, so bit surprising that I say AMD is so much more expensive than Intel, and that is a pretty big pricing gap that could see you go with premium DDR5 7200 memory with the 13900K and still save $100 US. There's probably more tuning headroom when it comes to memory timings with the 13900K as well, and this is something I plan to look at in a few weeks when I get back from my holiday, as long as there's no more damn products released between now and then. And speaking of which, my review was cut short as I did have to leave for a trip away, so apologies for the lack of testing here. I know there is a lot more to look at, and there's a lot more that I do want to look at, and that is something I'll do in the near future. But I do have a memory scaling benchmark with the 7950X3D coming up in the next few days, so I did squeeze that in. So you could say a little something that I'd prepared earlier. Overall, the 7950X3D, it's impressive, but it doesn't exactly bury the 13900K, and in fact the Core i9 looks as viable as ever. The 7800X3D though is probably going to be the better value option, as it will come in a little bit cheaper than the 13900K combo, while generally offering slightly better performance, at least based on what we've seen here. But of course there will be a 40 to 50 game benchmark coming up shortly after the release of that part, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But if you want to buy today, well, I feel like AMD's kind of shot themselves in the foot, as you'd probably just go with the Core i9 13900K, especially at its current sale price of $580 US. Bit of a timely discount there. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one, but just a reminder, we will have a lot more CPU content in the very near future, so make sure you subscribe for that. Also, if you'd like to support the channel directly and get some cool perks in return, we have Float, Plane, or Patreon. Links for those are in the video description. You get access to monthly live streams with Tim and myself. We do those live, answer your stuff in chat and talk with you guys. We have also a Discord server, members only server, where we do exactly that, and plus other stuff, behind the scenes content, Q&As. A lot of cool stuff there, so check it out if you're interested, but if not, hey, that's fine. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.